Okay, so hello, I'm Patrick. I have been roped into doing a talk tonight about Alexa. So I work for a company called Paperkite, and we do some cool stuff with apps, but some of the things that we've been playing with as well is voice assistants. So a little while ago I went to a Alexa Dev Days meetup up in Auckland where we spent some time understanding and learning how to do Alexa skill development, and Jethro cottoned onto that, and so somehow I ended up talking to you tonight. So I apologise in advance, this talk is going to be quite loosely organised because I basically put it together last night at about 11 o'clock. I'm intending on giving you a crash course in how to build an Alexa skill. I'm hoping to do a build it in front of you on the screen type thing. We all know that that's usually a really shit idea, so hopefully it works. If it doesn't, there's a whole bunch of screenshots that I'll walk through instead. But let's see how this works. So, Alexa, for those of you who don't know, Alexa is Amazon's flavour of a virtual or voice assistant. Virtual assistant, it's kind of like Siri, or, well, it's not like Siri because Siri's hopeless. It's like Google Assistant or Alexa are kind of the two. If you're a Samsung person, you might know about Bixby as well, but then I think most people don't seem to like it very much. Alexa comes in a variety of flavours. There's kind of two different parts of it. There's the hardware side of things and the software side of things. So Amazon is big on all of their machine learning and crazy APIs and everything being accessible and open. So the hardware side of things, they've got the Echo speaker, which is the first one on the left. That's like the main one that most people know about. Then they've got the Dot, the Spot, the Show, and the Auto. And those are just the official ones that Amazon makes. There's also like a bunch of things in Sonos's and a whole heap of other stuff. You can also actually even build your own one if you really feel like it. So it's possible for you to download the or use the Alexa voice service libraries on a Raspberry Pi. All you need to do is BYO microphone and speaker, and you can build your own Alexa. So the guy that I went to, who was speaking at the Dev Days, kind of talked about that, like you could do it, but it wasn't that something he would totally recommend. He's like, just buy the product. I don't know, I haven't had any success, I've never done this myself. This photo I just totally pinched from that Circuit Digest website. But yeah, if you're feeling so inclined, you could build your own. So I have a second generation Echo, which is the first one that we saw on the thing. I won it at the Dev Days thing for some reason. I built a skill for Helpetsa to help you reorder your last order, and for some reason that won me an Echo, but it wasn't even very good. So I've been using it at home for the last couple of months. I have to say, if I was going to, I don't know if I'd buy it, because it's kind of like not, it's okay, but it's not super useful. But I don't know if it's just me, but we mostly use it for streaming music, so it's got things like Spotify and iHeartRadio, that kind of thing. I've also got Home Assistant running on a Pi at home, and so you can use the Alexa and the Smart Home APIs to connect those two together and tell Alexa to do some, or that'll tell Alexa to do stuff, and that'll tell Home Assistant to do some stuff. I'll touch on that briefly at the end, but this talk's going to be more about writing your own custom skills if you're feeling that way inclined. I've also written a couple of skills of my own, and I've played around with a bunch of that stuff. So overall, yeah, like I said, it's pretty good, but it's not. The discoverability of an Echo is kind of good. There's like some gimmicky things in it, so you can be like, hey, Alexa, when's the next Avengers movie coming out? And it'll actually give you a decent answer. Like, Siri will probably just say, here's the results I found for Avengers movie on the and so, like in this case, she actually did tell me, the Alexa managed to tell me, yeah, great, it's coming out in March next year or whatever it was. So that was kind of neat, but that's about the only time I've ever found the trivia side of things to actually be that useful. Most of the time, if you're just sitting there watching TV, she'll pipe up in the corner going, I'm sorry, I didn't catch that. And you're like, I didn't say anything. There's still some work to do on those as well. As a side note, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask as you go. The last time I really did something formal on this was like a couple of months ago. So there's every chance that someone in here actually knows more about this than I do, and I apologise for telling you how to suck eggs.
If you do, it's fun for the speaker.
Yeah. So like I said, I'm not an expert on this. I've only got one skill in the store, and it's kind of rubbish. That's because it's the Wellington Rubbish Collection Calendar. Basically, it's a skill that allows you to say, Alexa, ask Wellington Rubbish when I should put the bin out, and it will tell you what day your bin is supposed to go out and which bin to put out. That was mostly because, I did that mostly because I had one of those little cardboard things on the fridge, and then my 2-year-old took it off. And so yeah, that's about the only thing that I've got super usefulness out of this. And it kind of works, but there is some really pain in the ass things about this that I can explain later, that mean that if you go and search for that on the Alexa store right now, you probably won't find it. So, woohoo. Cool, okay. So skills, what's a skill? So a skill is what Amazon calls the things you can make your Alexa do. So there's a bunch of built-in skills. Like I said, there's a Spotify one, there's iHeartRadio, there's a bunch of that kind of stuff. They've also got all of their like built-in trivia things, so asking when the Avengers movie is. And there's also the ability for you to build your own custom skills. So the types of skills that there are come in these different interaction models. So the custom interaction model is the one that we'll focus on tonight. There's a couple of other pre-built-in ones. So there's a list skill, which is like an oddly specific way of building shopping lists. I don't know why that's a special thing on its own, but I only read about it last night, so who knows. The smart home skills, which are pre-built, so those, that's basically built on, there's an API standard that Amazon's built called the smart home standard, and that is basically a JSON format that allows you to control devices within your home using an open standard. So there's a bunch of things that allow Alexa to do that out of the box. So if you have a device that supports the smart home standard, you don't have to write a custom skill to interface with it. The flash briefing is also another one. So that's you can say, Alexa, what's my flash briefing, and it will do. It's basically like a news bulletin or a short thing. So in the morning you can wake up and be like, Alexa, what's my flash bulletin? And say, today it's going to be 13 degrees and windy because you live in Wellington, and give you the news and all that kind of stuff. So for example, I've got the Radio New Zealand flash briefing skill, and it takes, a few people listen to Radio New Zealand, they do the news on the hour, the do thing. So it plays the last hour's one of those whenever you ask it. And then the last one was the video skills. I haven't really done much with this one. I think it's for when you have like your Amazon approved video playing device, something you can get it to play video stuff. But I have a Plex skill that I've tried to use, but every time I do it, it just says, I'm sorry, I can't work out how to do that at the moment, so I'm not entirely sure about that. Anyway, so custom skills. The components of a custom skill, there's basically a few key segments or parts of a skill that you need to understand. So the wake word is the thing that Alexa is supposed to listen to, and she does, to be fair, before it will wake up and listen to what you're saying. So the default one's Alexa. There's also Echo, Computer, and one other whose name I've forgotten. It's in my speaking notes that I can't see. But effectively, Alexa won't wake up and listen to your commands unless that word is heard first. Then after that, typically you've got what's called the invocation name. So that's like a name for your skill. That's got to be reasonably short, reasonably clear, and fairly unique. There isn't a global namespace for these. You can have one that's named the same as other ones, but you obviously can't have a user with the same invocation name on the same device. So you want to make sure it's reasonably.
So what do you mean?
Sorry?
What do you mean by user?
So like, as a person with an Echo, I couldn't have two custom skills with the same invocation name.
But they can both be in the store.
They can both be in the store, but it wouldn't play so nice if you've got them both on the same device at the same time. And then you have an intents, and intents are made up of utterances. So an utterance is really just an example of a phrase that the Alexa will use in its voice model to understand when to invoke your intent. So the invocation name is really the global thing. That's the thing that is the same across every intent. It's basically the wake, the thing that routes the request to your skill. And then the utterances, you can have any number of those within your model. The other part of those utterances is slots. So you'll see there's that tonight variable down the bottom. That's basically a variable. So you can say, oh, there's certain words of different kinds of things. So you don't have to explicitly state for every different value of that. You can just say this variable contains something that looks like a date or a number or a city or a something. So that then when the model hears that kind of stuff, it can pluck it out and give it to you as a variable. So one thing I totally learned last night was that when I did when I did the workshop, you had to say, Alexa, ask invocation name, my intent. Turns out now you can actually do the intent or the invocation name at the end, which is kind of neat. So you can flip it around, which is not something that I knew was possible until last night. So they're obviously continuing to evolve that. One of the limitations was that it was kind of awkward to work out how to write something or make something speak in that first format. So the second format does give you a bit more flexibility. So to make a new custom skill, you basically need to have an Amazon developer account. So you can get one of those from the developer.amazon.com website. And you also need an endpoint for those intents to be routed to. because we're good Amazon shills and we're at Jethro's office, we'll be using Lambda tonight.
Music to my heart.
Yeah, but you can also just use any old website or any old endpoint that you can do that can speak JSON over a public HTTPS URL. It's fairly simple to use. I can show you what the request and the response format looks like, but largely that's really all you need. So once you have your Amazon, once you've got your developer account, you need to log in and create what they call which is the voice model for the skill. So that needs at least one language. So Amazon has a bunch of different languages you can do it in. Obviously, most flavors of English, as well as Spanish and Chinese and a bunch of other ones. Actually, not enough Chinese is in there. Totally made that up. But one thing you need to be super careful of is that the language that you pick is linked to the store that your skill will be distributed in. So where I was alluding to earlier about the skill that I built, I chose Australian English as the language that I wanted to use, which means that my skill's only available in the amazon.com.au store. So that means most people have an amazon.com linked account. So if you search for my skill in most people's accounts, it doesn't show up. I would have needed to add US English to that thing, and then build and train a whole separate voice model just for the US English, the difference between those two. You also need to do the same for Indian English and Canadian English and UK English and every other version of English. So you end up with about 5 different voice models to say the same thing. So anyway, that's just something that's worthwhile bearing in mind. I had about 4 days of backwards and forwards with Amazon's seller support to work out that was totally a thing. Turns out they didn't really even think that was the thing either. But so yeah. Then you need the invocation name. So that is, again, that's like a one or two. Well, they recommend it's 2 words, at least 2 words. Can be 1 word if you really want it to be. It can't be like infringe on anyone's intellectual property, so you can't make a skill that you don't own the rights to, or the name you can't own the rights to. You can also use abbreviations if you want to, but you have to spell them out as individual letters. Then you need to have at least 1 intent. So the intent is basically like a command or a set of an instruction for it to do something. So in that example before, saying Alexa ask WHAM when the next meetup is, there might be a next meetup intent, and that's the thing that does and works out that particular component. You will need some sample utterances for that, so that's basically you write some example phrases that it will use to train the voice model to work out what you're saying for those particular examples, and maybe some slots. And then you need an endpoint to point it at, so this in our case that's going to be Lambda. So you can configure all of this via the Alexa developer console, and of course because it's Amazon you can also configure this with a stonking wrapping JSON file if that's what you so desire. So I am going to try and pray to the gods that this is going to work. So I have over here this is the Amazon developer console. So last night I made the WHAM demo, but today we're going to soldier on and just build one like we haven't done that. So we're going to go create a skill. And in here, we're going to call this the WHAM skill. We're going to pick US English because we want it to show up in the right store. And in this case, this is where you can pick the model that you want it to use. So for most people doing the custom stuff, you would need the custom one. If you're going to do flash briefings and smart homes, you would start with those ones. I haven't done any skill development with those sections yet, so I don't really know how it differs, other than if you want some special behavior out of the Alexa, that's what you're going to pick. So we'll pick custom, and we'll go next. And it does some loading things. Then you can choose a template. So in most cases, we're going to start from scratch. Amazon comes with a bunch of pre-built skill templates you can use. So for example, there's the fact skills. So you can be like, hey, tell me how far or give me some facts about Rick Astley, and it'll tell you that he's never going to give you up or let you down. And you can do a bunch of that kind of stuff if you want. And there's already built-in stuff for that. Same with these quiz games and things like that, but for this case we're going to start from scratch because we like to roll our own. So this is the main dashboard you get for the Alexa developer console. It's got a nice big checklist on the side that tells you what you need to do before you can get started. So the first thing we're going to do is set the invocation name. So in this case it's just said WHAM. So like I said, this is probably not, oh look, I've got 2 cursors, that's magical. WHAM's probably not a great example of something here because it's 1 word and it's short and they don't really like it, but I'm going to just leave it in there anyway. So this is the name that people have to say to invoke your skill. Most of the time the invocation names can't contain any of the launch phrases like launch, ask, tell, load, begin, enable, whatever. It's normally just a noun or a thing. Then we move on to intents. So there's a bunch of built-in intents already, which are things like, Alexa help or Alexa stop or cancel or fallback whatever that is. So those are the intents that get fired generally in the execution of the skill. So it's up to you to build your own handler for that. So if you had an in-depth dialogue-based skill where you could go backwards and forwards and ask a bunch of things, and then you got halfway through and you decided you didn't want to do that, you would say Alexa stop, and that would fire your stop intent, and then you would have to go and cancel a bunch of stuff if that's what you wanted to do. So in here we're going to create a new intent. So this is where we need to create the intent name. So we're going to go next, meetup intent. There's no specific naming convention for this. I kind of like flip-flop between this method and like the snake case method and stuff, but actually doesn't really matter. So then you have your sample utterances. So these are basically phrases that a user might say in order to invoke this intent. So you don't have to enumerate every single possible different way that a user could say this. You just have to be able to give rough ideas. So you might say, when is the next meetup? There's one about tonight. No, that's yeah. So when's the next meetup is enough for that. So then we might go and create another one, which is like confirm RSVP intent. Make sure I spell that right, because otherwise the demo isn't going to work later. And then you might say confirm. Please spell right. My RSVP for tonight. Now the thing here is that obviously you want tonight to be a variable, because you might be able to say confirm my RSVP for next week. You obviously can't do that at the moment because the next one's not announced yet.
I'm sorry.
Get with it. So in this case you can
schedule new
yeah. So this time you can surround it in brackets, and that'll create a new slot. And you might want to say meetup date, and this will then end up showing in your JavaScript later, or in your Lambda function later on. And in this case here, we want to pick what type of slot this is. So in this case, we can go down here and pick date. And so Amazon will automatically convert it to the right format for you, so that you've got that pre-formatted when you get a hold of it. It also helps it know and recognise which different words it should pick up in that slot. So if it's got can't quite work out what you mean, it can use that to recognise, oh, well, that statement did include a date, so it might be the meetup date one. So that's that. Cool. And then the last thing we need to do is obviously build the endpoint. So the endpoint in this case is a Lambda function, and this is where we end up going down the rabbit hole of needing to configure the Lambda function. So we'll do that in a moment, but the one thing I did want to show you is this is the file that gets generated that includes the configuration for your intents. So you can see now that if you wanted to, you could go and create. So in here I've got a pre-built one that I did before. So if I put that in there, save that, I'll end up with a few more intents in here from when I had built that example model last night. So the one thing you need to make sure you do every now and then is go build model. So that's where it takes a bunch of the inputs that you've just done and starts building and creating the model that trains the voice recognition part of the Alexa to be able to then invoke your intents. So that's that bit. And now I think if I go back to here, you can tell I practiced this, right? We just went through this again. So now that, because it actually worked, I can skip through this fairly quickly, because this was what was going to happen if it didn't work. Okay, so that's an example of what the interaction model looks like. Again, you've got a bunch of things that you can use to configure this. So if you were right into your configuration as code or that kind of thing, you could totally build this and deploy it automatically without having to click on those dirty user interfaces. Pretty sure that CloudFormation doesn't support the Alexa thing yet.
Oh, well, with Amazon, they've had CloudFormation as a first-class citizen with the API, so surely
this isn't part of Amazon Web Services though, so I know. Cool. So the next thing we need to do is go and build the backend in Lambda. So the endpoint of a skill is the URL that handles the post request with the data that's passed from your application. So the bit in orange you can see there is an example of the request that you get made to your web server. So you can see that basically if you can handle that request anywhere, you can respond to it. It's not like it needs to be anywhere special. The session and context variables are full of all sorts of awfully long randomly generated tokens that give you information about the user, what the device they're on at the moment, and API keys to access specific things. So there's APIs that you can use to find out the location of the device, things like that. You need special permissions to do that, and these requests have the API tokens and endpoints you would need to call if you had those permissions. But in this case here, so if we'd said Alexa ask WHAM when the next meetup is, we would get a request to our backend Lambda function that has a type of intent request, and it has an intent object, and it has a name of next meetup intent. The confirmation status of none basically means that there's no, you can have it so that intent requires Alexa to say, are you sure that's what you want, before you do it. So if you were going to do something that was like, Alexa, burn the house down, it's like, are you sure you want to do that? Whereas otherwise she would just do it for you straight away. Probably want that to be checked. So, to make it easier to build skills, there's the Alexa Skills Kit SDK, which I think is quite cleverly named to make it sound like Ask. It's very clever. Those are in Node.js, Python, and Java. In this case, we're going to use the v3 one for Node.js. That's available on GitHub at the Alexa URL that's there. Again, it's like a really standard token Amazon SDK that's like really super over-engineered with crazy amounts of injection and all sorts of like really awful naming conventions. There are a bunch of third-party ones that I've used before that make this a little easier. Someone's written like a kind of feels like Express.js, so it has a similar kind of thing where you can put like an intent for a URL and it routes to it and gives you parameters, and then you can return and it does a bunch of things, which is a little bit more easier to work with. But in this case, we're going to stick with the official way because praise Bezos. The serverless repository templates are also quite useful in this case. We're going to crib off one of these. So again, if you go and create a Lambda function, you don't have to go and write the whole thing from scratch. You can use one of these templates. So this is again the template for building the how-to skills. So if you had a thing like the example here, build a template called Minecraft Helper. So you can say, how do I craft a hammer? You can craft a hammer in Minecraft because that's what you use to craft things. Then this skill would give you the instructions on how to do that. So we're going to try creating our Lambda functions. So in here we have, I'm going to refresh this so that my token doesn't expire. And here is
font size larger, maybe.
Font size larger, yeah. Yep, is that better? Yeah. Cool. So for those of you that created a Lambda function before, you wouldn't be doing this in the user interface because you're not a heathen, but we're going to do that here. So we're going to use the AWS serverless application repository. We're going to pick, so you can see if we, you can see there's a bunch of skills in here, or skill kit things in here, so we're going to pick this one because, again, it just configures a bunch of things for us, and I'm lazy, so we're going to go WHAM. I'm going to make that just called something else, just because I made that one last night, and I'm pretty sure that if I click that button, I'm going to end up with a load of shit. So it's going to do this. Now, this is, for those of you that already get warm fuzzies about using CloudFormation, this is actually going to use CloudFormation, create a CloudFormation stack, and stand up the Lambda function and a bunch of IAM permissions and all sorts of other things for you. So it's going to do that now. While that is happening, we can just watch it. Actually playing this part. The way that the Alexa developer console and this link together is you have an array for your Lambda function and you have a skill ID in the dev console. At the moment, I'm going to do like nothing with respect to security for this, so kind of anybody can point any skill at this Lambda function and it will totally just do the request for you. You can set up a bunch of things to check to make sure that the skill that's making the request to your Lambda function is the one that you want it to be, and you can reference that back again. But I'm totally not going to do that today. Cool, so that's all been created, so now we'll go into here and we will see our Lambda function. So in this case, we'll notice that there's a bunch of JavaScript in here. For those of you that like JavaScript, it looks very JavaScripty. And there's a whole lot of stuff in here, so you can see what it's doing with the Minecraft helper and getting recipes for building stuff, and there's some German things in there if that's what you're into. So I'm going to pick some awfully slimmed down JavaScript that I just put last night and replace all of this with stuff that is going to be, so you don't really need to worry too much about this. Suffice to say that if you're using the Ask SDK, basically you create a handler. A handler is an object that has two functions, or an object that has functions, it doesn't really make sense, but it has a can handle method, which basically has this boilerplate in it all the time, which is check to make sure it's an intent request, and then also check to make sure it's the intent that I actually want to service. This is where you end up writing a bunch of boilerplate rubbish using the SDK, the standard SDK, that they could kind of simplify this for you if you wanted. And then you have the handle method. So the handle method creates, is the function that basically does all the hard work. So in this case, we have the intent that we're looking at here is the confirm RSVP one. So if I was super motivated and didn't start this at 8 o'clock, I would have written something that connects to the Meetup API, logs you in, confirms your RSVP, or tells you that you can't because there's already 53 people attending tonight. God damn it. So I just wrote something quick and cheap, which checks to make sure that there was a date value that was passed and said, sorry, it's already full this night, or whatever the date was that you'd said. Otherwise it says, oops, sorry, I didn't catch the date.
I was supposed to ask, please enter your credit card number for
priority service, yeah. And make sure you sign up for an enterprise support arrangement, yeah. So so you can see here that that's fairly straightforward. For most of you who would understand how to read a bit of code, that should seem fairly straightforward. It's not, there's not a lot going on here. Most of this boilerplate stuff is kind of the default, like how to handle if an error happens, how to deal with sessions and help request sending. And then basically right at the very bottom, you just have the skill builder and request handlers, and then you just pass all those objects in here and return it using your exports.handler because you're a good ES6 crazy JavaScript dependency management expert. So the only thing that we really want to care about after this is the ARN for the Lambda function. The other thing that I forgot to mention, which is quite important, is make sure that you put your Lambda functions in US East. Don't put them in AP Southeast 2, because they will not work. It won't tell you why it won't work, it just will not work. So that's mostly because when you go back to your skills dashboard and you set up the endpoints, you'll see here that well, you might not be able to see, it's quite small, but the region prefills, you can only use certain regions. So you can have it in North America, which is US East 1, you can have it in EU West 1, or you can have it in AP Northeast 1. So don't put your Lambda functions anywhere else because it won't work. It'll just silently fail and you'll be sitting there going, why the hell is this not showing? Trust me, I found that out the hard way. So we will paste our ARN in here, and that's pretty much all we need to do. So we've done. So we've created our skill in the developer console, which has got all of our intent that we can see on the side here. We've also created our Lambda function, which we've gone and monkeyed some code in here to do some special things. And then what we can do is test it. So I'm not going to actually speak to the thing tonight because I just tried it before and it was getting all sorts of things wrong. So I'm just going to type. It's actually kind of good if you're working in an office and you don't want to look like an idiot saying, hey, is this thing working yet? You can just kind of type at it. So what you type in this box is basically to just see if it's going to work. So what we will do is go ask WHAM when the next meetup is. And if my fingers cross very well, it should tell you. Jethro doesn't. So that's gone, fired a request to our Lambda function, and our Lambda function's gone and replied something that's obviously entirely truthful and there's nothing wrong with it whatsoever.
I can't fault that statement.
You can't fault that statement at all, I bet you couldn't. Yeah. So, I'm sorry, as you can probably tell, I like taking the piss out of Jethro a little bit.
You've got the bloody tattoo. Last year, I'm sure he has.
So what you can see here is that there's this JSON input thing. So this is basically the JSON that your endpoint would get sent. So if you have a REST API or whatever, or an API of some description that you want, that's the data that you're going to. So, oh, that's hopeless. Let's put that into here. Well, that's even worse. There we go. You can tell I code a lot, right? So yeah, so this is your, you got your session in here. The context that shows you the application ID you're using, the user, the device, the API endpoints, and access tokens. Most of the time, you'll probably need to use this kind of stuff. So, for example, in the rubbish skill that I have, if it gets old, I cache the user's address in a DynamoDB table because again, praise Bezos. And so I use the user ID to cache that, to create a cache record. So that's where that can be quite useful to understand between different requests who your user is. And then down in here is the bit that you probably mostly care about, which is the request for the intent. So in here, if you had slots, for example, it would tell you what your slot values were, and you could then receive those in your Lambda function. And then in response, all you've got to do is send back something that looks like that. So the thing that you'll notice here is this crazy SSML thing with the speak tags around it. So Amazon has this thing called the something markup language, which is basically like an awful version of XML that you can use to to put emphasis or different ways to speak or have phrases in the way that the Alexa will say the phrase that you've written. I can give you an example of where that doesn't really work next, but basically you can use that to put different, make it speak faster, slower, emphasize different words or not, use different phonetic pronunciation for different things. So there's, like the example that they gave us was getting Alexa to say Kia ora. And in the American accent, that's awful, don't do it. And so there was ways that you could make it phonetically say Kia ora correctly. So that's where you use the SSML if you were doing like a really proper in-depth version of this. So I can show you, for example, so we can say confirm my RSVP for tonight at, I don't know if this is going to work, let's find out, at WHAM. It might do. No, see? Yeah. My suspicion is because I never made my invocation phrase clear in this case. So you can say tell WHAM to confirm my RSVP tonight, and that will hopefully work. Okay, so there you go. So it didn't work out that tonight was actually a date, but anyway. So on that SSML thing, if we go back into here, I've got tell WHAM to get started. So it's obviously not that smart. So we obviously don't want it to go 321 go. The staging's not very good. It's all a bit kind of stuttery and weird. So what we can do is in here, here's one I prepared earlier, uncomment this line and magically comment this line, save the Lambda function. So you'll see in here that I've got this let's get started, then I want a break of 200 milliseconds, then I want to speak 20% slower than I would usually do. I want strong emphasis, and I want to interpret this phrase as digits, and then I want to close all those tags because XML, and then I want another break of 200 milliseconds, and then I want extra loud, extra high pitch, go. And so in theory, I should be able to say, put this back in here. So hopefully that gives you an idea about how you can manipulate the way the words work in the language is spoken. I never actually ran that. That sounded awful. So anyway, okay, cool. So
if you publish that,
yeah,
and it gets crazy popular,
yeah,
does that mean you pay for everybody to make requests?
Yes, you do. So so the one thing that you can get, so Amazon, if you publish a skill that's used by more than 30 people, they give you a credit. Now, I seem to recall it's like a $200 credit. That seems like really crazy. But if you publish a skill that becomes really popular, you get a bunch of Amazon Cloud credit to run the function. Notwithstanding the fact that Lambda, you can have like 1 million invocations a month or something and still not pay for it. So it's, like if you had someone that was using 1 million requests of your Lambda function a month, you'd be having a pretty popular skill. But yes, there is cost to that. And there's a bunch of things that Amazon does to try and incentivize you to do that. Again, if you wanted to use your own server, then that's, again, your own problem. Yep. So again, this is what we did before. I'll skip through this because it all went perfectly and I didn't have to do that. So again, yeah, so the things to watch out for in this case, so again, choose your language carefully. For being in New Zealand, you'd be probably tempted to pick Australian English because it's the closest to Kiwi English, but you've got to be careful that people don't have the Amazon Australian store set up on their Eco devices. And the distribution regions don't inform what store your skill is distributed in either. So what I did originally was I selected English Australian. I said only distribute it in the New Zealand store, and it just, nobody could find it. It was not even on the map. So then I resubmitted it for approval, went through the process of, and just said it's available for sale globally, and it only showed up in the Amazon.com.au store. And so then now I've got to go through the process. In my dashboard, there was, you might have seen under all my skills, I have a developer thing here, and I've got all of these English languages things added here, but now I have to go through and duplicate all the content for the whole skill model, everything, every time, for every different language. And I basically started that and then got bored. So I haven't done that yet. But that's something you just got to be aware of when you start. It's probably easier just to pick US English and just say it's for sale globally, and if someone in somewhere else part of the world wants to download it, then all power to them. They'll just have to find out when the rubbish bin would be picked up if they didn't. So there is an approval process for the store, kind of like going through the Apple Store. You have to submit it. So one of the things that I put in my description of my skill was, I kind of just built this for fun and I'm not very good at this, and they said, please take that out. So they want it to look sort of semi-professional. So you do have to be careful that your skill actually does something useful and it doesn't, it meets their guidelines and their standards. So I don't know if that particular voice, for example, will actually make it through the store, because they'd be like, you're butchering words. It's not human.
Just like for Patrick, if you're just doing personal skill, you still load it on your own device.
Yeah. So the skill the rubbish one that I built, I can use. So that WHAM skill I could use on my Alexa now, for example, because that device is linked with my developer account, and so my developer skills are available on that. So yeah, you don't have to submit it through the store if you don't want to. I had these like great aspirations for how useful my skill would be and how everyone would totally want to use it, and then as it turns out, it's just so hard for anyone to get a hold of it. I've had one person using it, that's me. So, go figure. Once you've submitted your skill, obviously as well, you get up with a new skill that comes up underneath, which is your development skill. So that is where you can then go make edits, and then you can publish those changes and those go through the store. The online simulators, the one that I showed you before that we type the text into, they don't work with the device location stuff. It took me a really long time to work out why, if I said Alexa rubbish which bin to put out, and it said, I'm sorry, I don't know where you live. And I'd spent ages trying to tell it what location I was in and where I was. It turns out that you just cannot test device location stuff without a real device. So if you don't have an Echo or something that can simulate a physical Echo, it's a hardware thing, you kind of shit it all up. There's a website called Echo Sim, which is supposed to simulate a real Echo. I couldn't even get that one to do it. So the only way I could do it was to set the device location on my Echo and then talk at it across the living room, which irritated my wife to no end for a Sunday evening when it took me a long time to get to work. And then, as I'm not bitter about this at all, the Amazon seller support is also very not good. So try and avoid as much as possible having to talk to Amazon's seller support, because they're not great. Cool, does anyone have any questions about the custom skill stuff? Does that all make sense? I know I talked through that really quickly. I haven't timed this talk at all. So.
Can Alexa, is it user aware?
Kind of. Right. The short answer is, so you can, there's a thing where you can go, Alexa, learn my voice.
Right.
And it's supposed to be able to tell who you are.
Yeah.
If I did that to my one, she just says, I'm sorry, I can't do that right now. So there is some, so at the moment, for example, I've linked my Spotify account to the Alexa. And so if my wife is at home and she says, hey, Alexa, play something on Spotify, I can't use my Spotify account on my phone anymore. There are supposedly some ways for it to link. You can, because the way you manage and configure an Alexa is with the Alexa companion app on your iOS or Android phone. The challenge with that is the app is bloody terrible. But also, you can link your accounts and stuff through the app. That's how you. So if you have an OAuth-based service that you need to link your account, you do it through the app, not through the Alexa, because obviously you can't click a confirmation prompt on some random third-party OAuth website if there's no screen. But the promise is that you should be able to link your Spotify account on your own account, and then when it knows that it's you talking, it'll use your authorized Spotify account rather than the other one. But either it doesn't work in New Zealand or it doesn't work anywhere. I don't know what the difference is yet.
Cool. Where do you get what rubbish needs to go on what day stuff on?
I broke the terms of service of the Wellington City Council website. I can show, if I've got enough time, I can show you how that works. It's also open source on my GitHub account if you want to see how awful my ES6 coding skills are. But yes, it goes to the Wellington City Council website, takes your location, uses the search form that was totally built for this purpose, which it's not, and then gets the thing, parses some HTML, and then tells you what to do about it. Cool. So I'll do a quick aside on the Smart Home API because we're all supposed to hear about home automation. So one of the other things that I've done is set up the Alexa to support the Smart Home v3 endpoint. So it's an Amazon standard that services can expose so that Alexa can easily integrate with them. So in this case, if you're using Home Assistant, you can get this out of the box without clicking any buttons by just using the Home Assistant cloud if you want to pay for the cloud service eventually, or using the cloud sounds like fun to you. I'm a sucker for punishment, so I used a self-hosted Lambda function that proxies those requests. It's written in Python, it's called Haskell. Basically you just take this thing, there's a whole set of instructions, you can run through those, put this Lambda function in your Amazon account, point it at your public-facing URL for your Home Assistant interface, and then you can then all of your devices and all of your Home Assistant devices will then show up in your Alexa app, and you'll be good to go. So in this case, you can run your Home Assistant scripts if you've done that straight from your Alexa, or you can incorporate them into your Alexa routines. So Alexa has a concept of a thing called a routine, which is basically like a shortcut. You could say, Alexa, good morning, and it will go and read you your flash briefing, and it will tell you what the weather's going to be. It'll set the music, it'll turn the lights on, it'll brew the coffee pot, and it'll turn your new Amazon Basics microwave on and nuclear porridge or something.
All our Xiaomi products.
Yeah, all your Xiaomi products. So this is basically what it looks like in the app. So this is the Alexa app. It looks nice. It's terrible, but you can see all of the devices and things that I've got. So I've got temperature sensors and a living room television and some switches that say whether people are home or not home and that kind of stuff. And then you've also got the scenes, which are basically mapped to scripts in Home Assistant. So in this case, the one that I use the most pretty much is the turn off home theatre one, which is basically, I can say Alexa good night and it turns off the TV in the amp. If I was a Xiaomi shell, I would also have lights and everything else that could be controlled the same way. But at the moment, because I'm super povo and all I've got is a serially controlled television, that's all I can do. But yeah, so this was basically, I had to do no configuration in Alexa, I had to do no configuration really on Home Assistant other than to say I wanted to exclude some certain stuff. So, because it gives you there's Home Assistant's got the groups of all switches, all devices, all scripts. So you could hit a button and run everything possible on your entire Home Assistant. I didn't want those to show up in here. So the only thing I had to do was configure Home Assistant to exclude those, but otherwise this just happened and showed up automatically. And so you can also do things like, Alexa, what's the temperature in the living room? Or Alexa, turn on the living room television, or whatever it is, and that will just kind of work, which is quite neat. It's also similar for those of you who have got the HomeKit plugin thing working in Home Assistant. It's basically the same thing, except it's done through Lambda, because no good Amazon integration would be done without Lambda. Cool.
Are they going external?
Yes, it does. Yeah. So
even though you don't like Home Assistant Cloud, you've got
yeah. Basically, I just didn't want to be locked into. Well, I just didn't want to use a third-party service that routed all my stuff through. I felt like I could control a Lambda function better.
So I'm not sure if the HomeKit stuff is going out. Must be with Siri.
It goes to your So it goes to your so with HomeKit you've got to have an Apple TV or an iPad locally on your network.
Or HomePod now as well.
Or HomePod, yeah. If you've got a spare $1,000 just flushed down the toilet.
It's only 10 grand to do your whole house.
So you've got to have that, and then yes, it would go transit over the internet after that. But my suspicion is that Apple wouldn't have, with Apple's stance on security and privacy, my suspicion is that it would be fairly well legit.
Apple's done a pretty good job of balancing both those concerns. It's local access only, but if you buy into their ecosystem, you've got network access as well, which is kind of cool.
Sorry.
In my odd time, I'm not a Xiaomi shill, but also Apple.
Apple
Really, there's a lot of shilling going on. If you really shill your product, bring it along and I'll shill it as well.
It's easily bought.
Easily brought.
Do I even have... Oh, no. Okay, yeah, sorry, I can't show you the code for that one because it's bigger than 5 megabytes, so that doesn't show up in the user interface.
It's a bit rubbish.
It's a bit rubbish. But yeah, so there's... It's on... maybe?
You can send us some links afterwards if anyone's keen to install some rubbish.
Install some rubbish, yeah. I mean, it's you're also welcome to try and just install it yourself because, open source and all that stuff. But yeah, basically there's a handlers thing, so when you want to ask for the get collection schedule, then it does a whole bunch of awful things to work out what your address is, and then it goes and gets the collection schedule, and then it loads that schedule, and then it tells it back to you. So ideally, it basically says, it's kind of funny, I haven't worked out how to make it not say this. I could use that phonetic pronunciation, but it goes, put out your willy bin and your rubbish bags before 8 AM or whatever. So it doesn't really, it's not that great. But yeah, that's about the most useful thing I've managed to get my Alexa to do that it didn't do out of the box. So yeah, I think that's it. Thank you for your attention.